Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with Brian Tankersley, your co-host. Brian and I have recorded prior podcasts about tax research, including on this product, BlueJ. But there have been significant enough announcements in the recent months that we thought it was worth revisiting that. And probably a lead reason to revisit this is BlueJ just announced $122 million in Series D financing that was led by Oak HCFT and Sapphire Ventures, but it also included funding from Intrepid Growth Partners, the previous investors, 10 Coves Capital, and CPA.com. And towards the end of our time together, we'll talk to you about how purchasing BlueJ through CPA.com can get you a discount. Now, the good news is I did get to meet and interact with Benjamin O'Leary, the CEO and co-founder of BlueJ, earlier this year. And related to the funding, he basically said their commitment is a powerful endorsement of our vision to transform tax research. With this capital and industry support, we'll accelerate innovation and deliver even greater value to tax professionals. We are building the future of tax. This is just the beginning. And Brian and I had a week before recording this podcast, asked for a technical demonstration of the platform. And that's the reason we were actually going to talk to you about this product today. But with yesterday's announcement, as it turns out, on August 4th, I guess it was 3 days ago, sorry, on this funding, that was kind of a big deal too. So Brian, way too much setup time, but I wanted to at least our faithful listeners to know that, yes, we knew we had talked about BlueJ in the past, and we talked about a lot of the AI-based tax research tools. Now, BlueJ also has been around for 10 years. You know, they started in 2015 with machine learning, and we'll talk about some of that as well. But
they're pretty heavily in the legal field as well, and they're doing UK, US, Canada, and Australia maybe, but they're in multiple countries. And so, again, that 122 million is a pretty impressive number, but they're trying to solve a whole lot of different problems besides just tax. So we have that in there. But this is just kind of reminds me of the, just to talk about and to back up for a second and talk about the investment environment that we're in today, where we have multiple firms, multiple startups and multiple companies like this that are taking on 8-9 figure sums of money to attack AI and to attack automation. And so, again, I think when we did our outsourcing presentation last year, and we talked quite a bit about outsourcing, I had that graphic of the bridge where it was, here's where we are, here's where we think we're going to go. And so this automation bridge that we talked about that didn't seem to come. And you and I kind of lamented, oh Lord, how long, oh Lord, do we have to wait? It seems like the software and the AI community have really come to play, and they're throwing big numbers at the investments in the products.
Yeah, and when your CEO like Ben is chasing that down, you've got to have a solid product and strategy and so forth. So I respect that. And we have had interactions in the past month or so with Christine Matus, head of the product marketing, and Lindsay, chief marketing officer. But this demonstration from Adam Haynes, the VP of product that we did, provided wonderful insight. So, one thing that we can claim on BlueJ is it's answering tax questions really well. And we know that historically, a lot of practitioners are Googling for an answer, but they can't attest to the primary information. And BlueJ is giving coherent responses to tax questions accurately. Now, I think part of the reason for that, Brian, is it's grounded in source material, and that means it's going to get good answers. But just to remind you of an AI attribute RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, was really the basis for the rapid improvements in BlueJ. Remember, they were doing tax laws in Canada using machine language or machine recognition. Uh, Machine learning. Never mind Randy today. Machine learning, and it was quite good. So I think, Brian, you'd ask a little bit about an example question that might be done. So do you want to pick that up for our listeners?
Sure, sure. So we actually had it. We actually asked it some more technical questions, like again in an asset acquisition, what are the rules for allocating purchase price and basis. It actually goes out and cites the source documentation. It also includes links to the related primary sources, and so it's they're providing links to code regs and again other guidance that's been provided by both federal and state regulators. And so it is pretty impressive, the things that it delivered.
Yeah, and it turns out, you and I have reviewed all six of the primary competitors in this space, and we're aware of at least three more competitors that are trying to get products to market. So this is going to get crowded fairly quickly. But, from there,
Boy, it's going to be a hell of a wrestling match, though. I think this is going to be an AI octagon where these people just try to beat the crud out of each other like it's UFC or something.
yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about it like that, but yeah, it could wind up being that. Now, one thing that has been a North Star, I believe, for BlueJ is ease of use. And they believe that their net promoter score is high based on the ease of use. And while we were talking with Adam, we asked several questions about different approaches. But one of the examples of ease of use is the quick links to create an email. And in down at the bottom of the prompting screen in BlueJ, you basically have my prompts, create a memo, or create a client email. And those quick links will take the research that's been done and draft that for you. Now, we did talk about the arc of this product being around for 10 years and the machine learning and how the early versions of GPTs did not work. But they did discover when ChatGPT 3.5 was released that it was the first time that the LLMs really worked. They had been working with the 3.0s and the 3.1s and concluded it just wasn't ready. So the early users of BlueJ were very engaged, providing a lot of feedback, and the BlueJ development team incorporated that feedback very quickly. They're still doing it today. So this product is, one of the grandfathers in the room, if you will. It was launched in June of 2023 with AI, even though they'd been using that machine learning since 2015. So, Brian, other background things before we just start calling out some of the other key features or things that we talked about with Adam?
Well, one of the things that I would call out is that this is based on ChatGPT, and that seems to be the most popular large language model slash AI, generative AI tool with most practitioners that we've seen. Even though we're seeing Claude be used more in enterprise businesses, we're seeing ChatGPT still is kind of the practitioner's favorite in many ways. And so this so the fact that this is based on the chat gpt large language model means that the things you learn with how to prompt things in that product, or the things you learn about how to do prompts generally, are going to apply pretty much directly to BlueJ and your use of it. Even though they've got they've got things to again they've got specialized things to handle more complex things in it, so it is a customized version of this. And they did have to make a significant number of tweaks to make it act the way they wanted it to and to provide the user experience. So it's a pretty interesting tool in here.
And I will just say that Adam was very straightforward with us. We do have things under non-disclosure, which obviously we would never share on a podcast like this. But it was amazing how many insights he provided us, and then also deferred to his CTO when he said, that part you probably have to get from the CTO, but one arc, just because this comment may not age as well, Chat GPT 5 is imminent. And how these products that are using OpenAI's new generation platform will morph over time. My expectation is they will improve because of the increased number of tokens, the better context that they can use. But I think we'll have some products that have been working well that'll stumble for a little bit. That's not their words, mine, on any product using Chat GPT in this new generation. So, one of the first technical questions I asked was big firms want to have API access. And, you know, Adam did disclose to us, and this is probably as close as we get to a roadmap item, API access is coming in the intermediate term, they believe. And that makes sense. Almost every vendor is working on APIs. Now, APIs, application program interfaces, this is the way that you can access data and move it from one system to another through pretty easy to use techniques. I do not know of a modern product that hasn't exposed the APIs. And Adam did show us the APIs and the schema and how that all worked. And that's probably not important for this particular podcast, but it was clear to us that the access needed by most firms that want APIs will see that in the intermediate, using Adam's word here. So then I ask, another question, Brian, and my question was, why not prompts like some of the competitors have, like, summarize a document or follow on questions and so forth. And I thought Adam's response on that was pretty interesting, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. He thought it was. He thought again they were trying to go through here and set up some of the tools like this. It's a, I don't know, the when we're looking at those pieces, it lets you be a little more customized to what you want and describe a little closer what you want with it. They also had some problems where they would have two conversation threads and things would get messy. Remember, since it's built on the Chat GPT platform, you're not going to get the exact same wording of responses every single time. And that's, but they have gone through and winnowed it down so that you will get accurate responses.
Yeah, and so the word that he got to was messy, as Brian just laid out, and he said, "Look, we're trying to make this tool simple to use, and we're trying to get people to go back to the primary conversation." And as Brian and I both know from teaching so much AI, the more you push AI, the more tired it gets, and it just tends to get a little lazy and so forth. So I thought that was interesting. I also did ask about shared prompts by user. And again, that's likely to occur here. But the accuracy on complex tax was also a pretty interesting response. So, Brian, again, knowing you have more tax and audit expertise than I did, I thought the interesting answer here was they focus on getting better tax answers, and that
Yeah.
governs
And,
everything they do.
and as we've talked to Walter Sluer, CCH, and Thomson Reuters and Bloomberg BNA, that's the hard thing to do here. And that's why I wouldn't, that's why I would be very, very careful if you're trying to create your own Chat GPT, your own GPT for this, because there are some significant tweaks you have to make, because I've played with some of this kind of technology with primary sources. And if I think I think you really want to use the technology and the filters and the tweaks that they've applied to this, because they're really applying this based on their experience trying to make this tool do what they do. An example of this that I think we talk about a little bit later was, it actually incorporates the Internal Revenue Manual into this document. And what they said was that it's hard sometimes to the thing they had to do is they had to develop some of this context so that you could know, okay, am I wanting to get primary sources, or am I wanting to know what am I doing a procedural question and I need to go to IRM, or what do I really need in this context? And that's the real magic, the special sauce, as it were, that this really delivers. And because again, they this is this is like being an airplane pilot. You're only as good as your last landing. And that's the thing about this, is that they're really focusing on trying to get everything accurately.
Yeah,
uh,
and the feedback they get from their customers is that they get the best tax answers on the market. And frankly, all of these research tools are doing well in this area. But where they're currently using GPT-4.1, they had to build some secret sauce to synthesize to get the right answers. And, right now they're using a context window of about 30 to 60K tokens. So it is fascinating to me what will happen with the product as the GPT based models work. But the key thing I think for our listeners out of all the questions we ask is this is really intended to be a tax only product. They're not trying to do client accounting services or audit research. They just want to do tax really well. And you push the point on payroll, which we'll talk about in a minute. But, doing tax really well in Canada, in the UK, and the US, and the jurisdictions they're in is a big deal. But
yeah,
they're,
so
but
this
they're,
is going to be different from the Thompson and WK approaches that they do, that are going to run against both tax and audit and all of their research content. This is focused on tax only. So I want to just raise my hand and say that real quick, because I think it's critical that you get this, is that the Venn diagram of what it covers does not include CAS and A&A and gap guidance of any kind.
yeah. And, as we push that, the UK coverage is pretty new. They just entered there in May of 2025 from Accountex. And you then turned it, because I turned it to international and you turned it to states. And I thought the answer there was fascinating because they do have full state coverage, but I think his words were they've been chipping away since the fourth quarter of 2024. This is no small problem. And in that context, then I think you went on to talk about local jurisdiction tax.
Yeah, and I will say the states and the local, this is why 50 state payroll, I refer to it as it's like Afghanistan, in that it's where empires go to die, because we can look at the amount of money that Zero spent on trying to do payroll years ago, and it was, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and they got to like 23 states. And so and some of those didn't have income taxes, by the way. And so the thing about it here is that the taxability rules and the what is taxed and how it's taxed and what's taxable, not taxable, and the Byzantine regulation here, getting that right is really hard, and that's why they've been chipping away at it. I don't think they want to promise more than they can deliver at this point, but I think they said they're pretty comfortable with the output from it, and the stuff I saw looked pretty good.
Yeah, and the other thing that I learned was that they were using tax notes for editorial commentary. I think I knew that from the past, but I'd kind of zoned it off and forgotten that. And the other thing that is always true with all applications, people use the product in creative ways. And because their users are experimenting with prompts, they're starting to figure out that they can do some tax planning strategy and advisory services that way. So, those types of things will continue to evolve. I then went on to ask about a library of prompts. And, we talked about how that might play out. So, in terms of trying to make that play out, what would you say, Brian?
Well, I mean, I get that. I think they're offering some training and trying to help people out. Learning how to go through and do prompts generally is it's something you just have to throw time at. And that's, in my mind, that's one of the major threats to AI adoption in accounting firms in particular, because everybody that's senior in an accounting firm, you're the ones that need to be experimenting and trying things out. Okay. And so the problem is when you have a habit of living life 6 or 15 minutes at a time for a timesheet, you don't allow yourself any time to throw at something that may or may not work out. You get so focused on efficiency that you miss the whole effectiveness window. And so that's something where, I would say is bigger than just BlueJ with all the generative AI. I think you have to, and agentic AI and low code, no code. I think you have to throw some time at these things so you understand them, so you can manage them. Even if you're not going to be the person that creates the ones for your firm, I think you need to play with this stuff a little bit so that you can kind of understand conceptually what's possible and what the processes look like. Again, you don't have to be a programmer, just like, Gary Boomer once said, you don't have to you don't have to know how to build a watch in order to be able to tell time. That's true, but you probably need to understand what time is, and you need to understand, enough about it, and have enough experience that you can figure out what works, what doesn't. So
So, we went on then to ask about settings and administrative announcements and the like. So Brian, you got into more of that.
yeah, so again, they do cover quite a few different jurisdictions. They have light dark view in there. So if you're somebody that likes to work in a dark room like I do sometimes, so that the light doesn't blind me, it works out pretty good. They have English and French, all US tax treaties, the OECD treaties as well. They do some transaction, excise to excise, sales, and personal tax. So in Canada, they do excise. UK, they do VAT. US, Title 26 gets a little more granular in there. They're trying to focus on the currency of the data, make sure things are updated and outdated. And so that kind of brought us over to that they do include the administrative announcements, but only to the extent that it comes through tax notes. Okay. So they're trying to focus on the big things there as opposed to the minutia of everything in the Federal Register.
And to your point there, Brian, being updated daily and daily removing outdated information was new learning for me on this platform. But, they do have some limitations of where they're pulling this. But can you imagine all of this tax code daily getting updated and the process that's behind it? We didn't dig into that. I was just so stunned I didn't know how to ask the right question.
It's just such a Leviathan. I mean, that's just, that's the ultimate, eating an elephant thing. You think about, okay, I'm going to update US federal, and now I'm going to update Canadian federal and Canadian provinces. Okay. And I can do that. And then I'm going to update UK. And now I'm going to update all 50 US states and territories. And, it just, you just run out of bandwidth at some point.
Yeah, if we saw a similar structure with the sales tax folks like Avalara as they were trying to handle all those jurisdictions. But now if you get down to greater detail, things like the Internal Revenue Manual, which is so huge, or the notices or payroll tax coverage, those things are all pretty big and they're working their way towards those. But, my caution, I think, right now is, some of this will be covered, some of it at the fringe will not be. And I know, Brian, you asked about payroll in specific.
Yeah. So in payroll, you've got with payroll, you've got all these other regulations like FMLA and the HIPAA and all these other related regulations that you have to follow related to this. They don't do that. Okay. They focus on things where there is a return and there is a payment, and again, so they cover FUTA and SUTA calculation and remittance rules and everything else like that, but they don't cover the unemployment insurance regs. Okay, so I guess the way I'd say that is if you become unemployed and you're an employee and you're eligible for unemployment, they don't cover any of those regs. Okay, they cover again the stuff related to the calculations. Again, the stuff that the accountants are going to need. They are also they told us quite a bit about privacy in here. They are running native instances of these in country for data centers, and that's something critical in both the UK as in Canada because of regulations in those countries. Okay, certain other information you wouldn't want to share. You wouldn't want to share outside a US instance, just from a privacy perspective. in there. But again, they've been through extensive vetting with large clients on the architecture, and they've passed through that. They also have a dedicated customer success team. They have a prompt guidebook that they can share with folks that's in the help center, and a number of videos and tutorials and other things to help people frame questions.
Well, so all of that said, as of today's recording, the pricing is $1,498 per user per year with a 10% discount through CPA.com. Your pricing may vary, when you get ready to do the negotiations. But Brian, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, see site for details and all that. But I think this is a great product for, again, to use for tax research. And again, I think it's interesting to have different sources that you try out, that you use different ways. And so there's like we said earlier, there are a lot of folks trying to solve this AI and tax thing and the AI and accounting thing. And there are going to be a lot of different approaches. And we're not going to get down to a 5 winners, 6 winners at this point. Okay. Right now, there are, you said, what, 5 plus 3 that are out there, plus Wolters Kluwer and Thompson and all the others there. So, there's a lot, there are a lot of competitors in this space. But again, for folks doing tax questions that want something that's easy to use, similar to ChatGPT, this may be the ticket for many of you.
Well, we appreciate you listening in again today, and we look forward to talking with you again soon in another Accounting Technology Lab. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.